The notification sound from my phone felt like a gunshot in the dead silence of my bedroom. 2:47 a.m. Unknown number. The text message contained just 4 words that made my blood freeze. "We know you recorded." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling as I realized my worst nightmare was coming true. The audio file hidden in my phone, the one I'd been too terrified to listen to again, had somehow been discovered. And now the people I'd trusted my entire life, the ones who were supposed to protect me, were hunting me down to destroy the evidence of what they'd done. But what they didn't know was that I'd already made copies. And what they definitely didn't know was that I'd already contacted someone who could make sure the truth would never be buried again. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up in Millfield, Connecticut, the Richardson family looked perfect from the outside. Dad worked as a financial advisor at the biggest firm in town, Mom volunteered at the local animal shelter, and my older brother Jake was the star quarterback who never missed church on Sundays. I was Megan, the quiet middle child who kept straight A's and never caused trouble. Our house on Maple Street was the kind people drove past and admired. White picket fence, manicured lawn, flower boxes under every window. Neighbors would wave and comment on how lucky we were to have such a close-knit family. They had no idea what happened behind those pristine walls. The first time I understood something was seriously wrong, I was 14. It was a Tuesday night in November, and I'd come downstairs for a glass of water around midnight. The kitchen was dark, but I could hear voices coming from Dad's study, hushed, urgent whispers that made my skin crawl. "Can't let anyone find out about this," Mom was saying, her voice strained in a way I'd never heard before. "She's just a kid, Linda. Kids don't remember things clearly," Dad replied, but there was something desperate in his tone. "What if she does? What if she tells someone at school?" I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. They were talking about me, but what was I supposed to remember? What was I not supposed to tell? "We handled it before, we'll handle it again," Dad said firmly. "Sarah knows what happens if she talks." Sarah, my younger sister who'd been acting strange for months, flinching when Dad hugged her, having nightmares that left her screaming until Mom came running. Sarah, who'd started wetting the bed again at age 12 and refused to be alone with any adult family member. I crept back upstairs, but sleep was impossible. The next morning, I watched Sarah push her scrambled eggs around her plate, her usual chatter replaced by an eerie silence. She looked so small, so fragile, with dark circles under her eyes that seemed too mature for her face. "You okay, Sarah?" I asked quietly. She looked up at me with these hollow eyes that seemed far too old for a 12-year-old. For a moment, I thought she might say something, but then Mom appeared behind her, placing both hands on Sarah's shoulders. "She's fine, aren't you, sweetheart?" Mom said, and I watched as Sarah's entire body went rigid, just tired from staying up too late reading. The squeeze Mom gave Sarah's shoulders looked gentle enough, but I saw how my sister's knuckles turned white as she gripped her fork. Whatever was happening to Sarah, Mom was part of it, and judging by that conversation I'd overheard, so was Dad. Over the following weeks, I became a detective in my own home. I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. The way conversations stopped when I entered a room, how Sarah's bedroom door was always locked from the outside when our parents went out, the prescription bottles in Mom's purse that didn't have her name on them. The breaking point came during Christmas break. Jake had brought his girlfriend Rachel home from college, and the house was full of that forced holiday cheer that felt more suffocating than festive. We were all gathered in the living room, opening presents and pretending to be the perfect family. Sarah had been quieter than usual all morning, barely touching the gifts pile in front of her. When Dad handed her a wrapped box, I watched her face drain of all color. "Open it, princess," Dad said, his voice carrying that edge I'd learned to recognize, the one that meant you better do what he said or face consequences later. Sarah's hands shook as she tore off the wrapping paper. Inside was a brand new phone, the latest iPhone model that I'd been begging for all year.
Wow, Sarah got the new phone? Jake said, surprised. That's like $1,000, Dad. Sarah's been such a good girl lately, Dad replied, ruffling her hair. But I saw the way Sarah recoiled from his touch. I saw how Mom quickly looked away, and I definitely saw the way Dad leaned down and whispered something in Sarah's ear that made her go completely still. What did Dad say? I asked Sarah later when we were alone in her room. She was sitting on her bed, staring at the phone like it was a weapon. He said this phone has special features. He can see everything I do on it, every text, every call, every photo. Her voice was monotone, almost robotic. He said now he'll always know where I am and who I talk to. That's when I realized the phone wasn't a gift, it was a leash, a way to monitor and control Sarah even more than they already were. Sarah, what's really going on? I pressed. You can tell me anything. For a moment, her composure cracked, and I saw the terrified little girl underneath. I can't, Megan. They said if I ever tell anyone, something bad will happen to you too. They said they'd make sure you got hurt, and it would be all my fault. The room felt like it was spinning. My own family was threatening to hurt me to keep Sarah silent about whatever they were doing to her. The people who were supposed to protect both of us were using me against my own sister. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out the truth, no matter how dangerous it was, and I was going to make sure Sarah knew she wasn't alone anymore. I started small, pretending to be asleep earlier than usual so I could listen to conversations through the thin walls. I memorized the family's routine, figuring out when parents had their private discussions. Most importantly, I started carrying my phone everywhere with the voice recording app always ready to go. The opportunity came 3 weeks later. Mom and Dad thought Sarah and I were both asleep, but I'd heard Dad's footsteps going towards Sarah's room at 11 p.m. I grabbed my phone, crept down the hallway, and positioned myself outside her door. What I heard next destroyed any remaining illusion I had about my family. Dad's voice was different than I'd ever heard it, cold, manipulative, threatening. He was telling Sarah exactly what he expected from her, what would happen if she didn't comply, and what would happen to me if she ever breathed a word to anyone. But worse than Dad's voice was Sarah's response. She wasn't crying or protesting, she was negotiating. My 12-year-old sister was bargaining with our father about unspeakable things, trying to minimize the damage to both of us. She'd become an expert at survival in her own home.
I recorded 23 minutes of audio that night, 23 minutes of evidence that would prove my family wasn't what they pretended to be, 23 minutes that would either save Sarah or get us both killed. The next morning, Sarah looked at me across the breakfast table, and something passed between us. She knew. Somehow, she knew I'd been listening, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. But I also saw Mom watching both of us with the sharp attention of a predator who sensed something had shifted in her carefully controlled environment. The game had changed, and everyone in the house could feel it. Dad arrived home at 4:17 p.m., exactly 43 minutes earlier than usual. I knew because I'd been watching the clock obsessively, counting down to what felt like my execution. The sound of his BMW pulling into the garage made my stomach clench with dread. He didn't come inside immediately. Through Sarah's bedroom window, I watched him sit in his car for nearly 10 minutes, making phone calls. His face was animated, gesturing, even though whoever he was talking to couldn't see him. When he finally emerged, his usual confident stride was replaced with something more aggressive, predatory. "Girls, living room, now." His voice carried up the stairs with military precision. Sarah and I exchanged glances before heading downstairs. Jake was already there, looking confused and slightly annoyed at being pulled away from his video games. Mom sat rigidly on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Dad paced in front of us like a prosecutor addressing a jury. He'd changed from his work clothes into jeans and a sweater, but somehow that casual outfit made him seem more dangerous, not less. "Someone in this room has betrayed this family," he began, his voice eerily calm. "Today, I received calls from 3 different people. My boss asked why Child Protective Services was inquiring about my family background. Our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, mentioned that a county worker had been asking questions about us, and the principal of your school wants to schedule a wellness check meeting. Jake sat up straighter. Wait, what? CPS? Why would they? That's exactly what I'd like to know, Dad cut him off, his eyes scanning each of our faces. Because someone has been spreading lies about this family. Someone has been telling stories that could destroy everything we've built. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. His gaze lingered on me for what felt like an eternity before moving to Sarah. Sarah, sweetheart, come here. I watched my sister's entire body language change. She became smaller somehow, her shoulders curving inward as she approached our father. He guided her to stand directly in front of him, his hands resting on her shoulders in what would look like a loving gesture to anyone who didn't know better. Now, I know you've been having a hard time lately, Dad said, his voice taking on that manipulative, gentle tone I'd learned to fear. Growing up is difficult. Sometimes kids get confused about what's normal family closeness and what isn't. Sometimes they misinterpret things. Sarah nodded mechanically, but I could see her hands shaking at her sides. If someone at school has been asking you questions, putting ideas in your head about our family, I need you to tell me. Because people outside our family don't understand how we show love to each other. They might try to turn something beautiful into something ugly. The way he said beautiful made my skin crawl. But what happened next shocked everyone in the room. I didn't tell anyone at school anything, Sarah said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. But maybe someone should ask questions. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's grip on Sarah's shoulders tightened until she winced, but she didn't take back her words. Excuse me? Dad's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd shouted. Sarah, Mom warned sharply from the couch. But Sarah looked directly into Dad's eyes and said, maybe it's good that people are asking questions. Maybe people should know what really happens in this house. Jake stood up abruptly. Okay, what the hell is going on here? Sarah, what are you talking about? That's when I saw Dad's mask slip completely. The gentle, manipulative facade cracked, revealing something cold and dangerous underneath. His hands moved from Sarah's shoulders to her arms, gripping them tight enough to leave bruises. You ungrateful little... Let go of her. The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them. Dad's head snapped toward me, his eyes blazing with rage. What did you say? My legs felt like jelly, but I stood up anyway. I said, let go of her. Megan, sit down, Mom hissed, but I ignored her. You want to know who's been talking to people? I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word. It was me. I called Child Protective Services. I told them everything. The room exploded into chaos. Jake started shouting questions, Mom screamed my name, and Dad released Sarah so suddenly she stumbled backward. But I wasn't done. I recorded you, I said, pulling out my phone. 3 nights ago, I have 23 minutes of audio that proves exactly what kind of person you really are. Dad's face went through a series of expressions: shock, rage, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like fear. Give me that phone, he said. No. Megan, give me the phone right now, or what? You'll hurt me too? I backed toward the front door, keeping my phone clutched against my chest. I already sent the recording to CPS, and to Aunt Kelly, and to 2 other places you'll never find. Jake was staring at all of us like he'd woken up in a different family. Recording? Recording of what? Someone please explain what the hell is happening. Mom stood up from the couch, her face twisted with an emotion I'd never seen before, pure hatred directed at me.
You stupid, stupid girl, she snarled. Do you have any idea what you've done? Your father's career is over. Our reputation in this community is destroyed. And for what? Some childish fantasy about... It's not a fantasy, Sarah screamed, her voice cracking with months of suppressed emotion. It's real. It's all real, and I'm tired of pretending it isn't. Jake looked between our parents and Sarah, and I watched as understanding slowly dawned on his face. His expression shifted from confusion to disgust to rage in a matter of seconds. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Oh my God, Dad, what did you do?" Dad ignored Jake entirely, his focus laser-focused on me. "Megan, you don't understand the consequences of what you've set in motion. That recording, you're misinterpreting things, taking them out of context." "Then explain the context," I challenged. "Explain why Sarah flinches when you touch her. Explain the locked bedroom doors and the surveillance phone and the threats about what would happen if she ever told anyone." "Those aren't threats, they're..." "They're what?" Jake demanded, stepping between Dad and me. "Because it sounds like Megan's describing abuse. It sounds like you've been abusing Sarah." The word hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. No one had said it out loud until that moment. Dad's composure finally shattered completely. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Jake. None of you understand the pressures I'm under, the sacrifices I make for this family." "Sacrifices?" Sarah laughed, but it was a broken sound with no humor in it. That's when Dad made his biggest mistake. Instead of trying to de-escalate, instead of attempting to manipulate us back into compliance, he got angry. "You want to destroy this family over some misguided notion of..." His phone rang, cutting him mid-sentence. He glanced at the screen, and all the color drained from his face. "Unknown," he muttered. "Answer it," I said. "I bet I know who it is." Dad answered the phone with a shaking hand. "Hello?" Even from across the room, we could all hear the professional female voice on the other end. "Mr. Richardson? This is Amanda Walsh from Child Protective Services. We need to schedule an immediate home visit to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding your family." Dad's eyes met mine across the room, and in that moment, he knew. He knew that everything he'd built, every secret he'd kept, every threat he'd made was about to come crashing down. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him anymore. The 48 hours between Amanda's phone call and the official CPS visit were the strangest of my life. Our house transformed into a theater where everyone was playing a role, but nobody knew their lines anymore. Dad went into full damage control mode. He spent hours on the phone with lawyers, speaking in hushed tones behind closed doors. I'd catch fragments of conversations: family dynamics, misunderstanding, teenage rebellion phase. He was building his defense before the investigation even began. Mom became a cleaning tornado, scrubbing every surface until the house looked like a museum. She reorganized Sarah's room, removing anything that might seem unusual to outside eyes. The lock on Sarah's bedroom door mysteriously disappeared overnight, replaced with a standard doorknob that Mom smiled with satisfaction. "See," she said to Sarah while rearranging her bookshelf, "just a normal teenager's room. Nothing strange here at all." But Sarah had changed fundamentally since our living room confrontation. She walked taller, spoke louder, and for the first time in months, she looked people directly in the eye. The terrified compliance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like hope. Jake became my unexpected ally. The night after Dad's phone call with CPS, he knocked on my bedroom door around midnight. "Can I come in?" I nodded, and he sat heavily on my desk chair, running his hands through his hair. "I've been thinking about everything," he said quietly. "All the weird stuff I ignored. Sarah's behavior changes, the way she got quiet whenever Dad was around, how she stopped wanting to hang out with the family." He looked up at me with guilt written across his face. "I thought she was just being a moody preteen. I thought you were both being dramatic about normal dad strictness. I didn't want to see it." You couldn't have known. No, Megan, I could have. I should have. His voice cracked slightly. I'm the older brother. I was supposed to protect you both, and instead I was so focused on my own life, my girlfriend, college, football. I failed. That conversation changed our family dynamic completely. Jake started positioning himself as a buffer between our parents and Sarah. When Dad tried to have private conversations with her, Jake would suddenly appear, asking for help with homework or wanting to show her something on his laptop. Meanwhile, I was living in a constant state of hypervigilance. Every time my phone buzzed, every unexpected knock at the door, every car that drove slowly past our house made my heart race. The recording was still hidden in multiple locations, but I worried constantly that my parents would find some way to access my accounts and delete the evidence. The morning of the CPS visit, Mom had a complete breakdown. I found her in the kitchen at 6 a.m., still in her pajamas, surrounded by photo albums she'd pulled from storage. Pictures were spread across every surface: family vacations, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, all evidence of the perfect Richardson family life. "Look at these," she said when she saw me, her voice manic and desperate. "Look how happy we all are. Look how normal everything is." She held up a photo from Sarah's 10th birthday party. In it, Sarah was smiling widely, blowing out candles, while Dad stood behind her with his hands on her shoulders. "Does this look like an abusive family to you?" Mom demanded. "Does this look like a father who would hurt his daughter?" What she didn't see, but I did, was how tightly Dad was gripping Sarah's shoulders in that photo. How Sarah's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. How she was leaning slightly away from him, even while appearing to be happy. "Photos don't tell the whole story, Mom," I said quietly. Her face twisted with rage. "You don't understand what you've done to this family, Megan. When those people come here today, they're going to see a happy, normal home. And whatever twisted fantasy you and Sarah have concocted is going to fall apart under real scrutiny." But even as she said it, I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. For the first time, Mom was questioning whether her version of reality would hold up under investigation. Amanda Walsh arrived at 2 p.m. sharp, accompanied by a male colleague she introduced as Detective Marcus Torres from the County Sheriff's Department. Dad greeted them with his most charming smile, the same one he used for client meetings and neighborhood barbecues. "Please come in," he said warmly. "We're happy to clear up whatever misunderstanding has brought you here." Amanda was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes that seemed to see everything. Detective Torres was older, more serious, carrying a tablet and a digital recorder. "We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Richardson," Amanda said as they settled in our living room. "We'd like to speak with each family member individually, starting with the parents, then the children." Dad's smile faltered just slightly. "Is that really necessary? We're an open book here. Nothing to hide." "It's standard procedure," Detective Torres replied. "It helps us get a complete picture of the family dynamic." They spoke with Mom and Dad first, behind the closed doors of Dad's study. The rest of us waited in the kitchen, the tension so thick it was hard to breathe. I could hear the murmur of voices, but couldn't make out specific words. After 45 minutes, Amanda emerged alone and asked to speak with Jake first, then me, finally Sarah. When it was my turn, Amanda led me to the dining room while Detective Torres remained in the living room with my parents. She set up her recorder and pulled out a notepad. "Megan, I want you to know that everything you tell me is confidential within the bounds of this investigation. Your parents won't hear this recording unless it becomes part of legal proceedings." I told her everything: the overheard conversations, Sarah's behavioral changes, the surveillance phone, the threats about hurting me if Sarah talked. When I mentioned the recording I'd made, Amanda's entire demeanor shifted. "You have audio evidence?" "Yes. I already sent it to your email, but I can play it now if you want." She nodded, and I pulled up the file on my phone. As the recording played, I watched Amanda's expression grow increasingly grim. When Dad's voice came through clearly threatening Sarah and describing what he expected from her, Amanda stopped the playback. "That's enough," she said quietly.
Megan, you did the right thing by coming forward. This recording it's very compelling evidence. What happens now? That depends on what Sarah tells us. But I want you to know that regardless of what your parents might say, you're not in trouble. You're not destroying your family. You're protecting your sister. Sarah's interview lasted over an hour. When she finally emerged from the dining room, her eyes were red from crying, but she looked lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Amanda and Detective Torres spoke quietly near the front door before Amanda approached my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Richardson, based on our investigation today, we have serious concerns about Sarah's safety in this home. We're recommending immediate temporary removal while we conduct a more thorough investigation. Dad's careful composure finally cracked completely. You can't just take my daughter based on some teenager's fantasies and misinterpreted conversations. We can and we are, Detective Torres said firmly. Sarah will be placed with a vetted family member while this investigation continues. We understand she has an aunt in Boston. I saw Mom grab Dad's arm to stop him from saying something that would make the situation worse. But the damage was already done. The recording, combined with Sarah's testimony and our family's obvious dysfunction, had given CPS everything they needed. As we watched Amanda help Sarah pack a bag, Dad turned to me with pure hatred in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said quietly, so only I could hear. "You think you've won something, but you have no idea what you've started." But looking at Sarah, really looking at her for the first time in months, I knew I'd made the right choice. She was going to be safe. Finally, after everything, my sister was going to be safe. And that was worth whatever came next. Sarah had been gone for 6 days when the real retaliation began. Aunt Kelly called me every evening at exactly 7 p.m. to let me know Sarah was safe. Those phone calls became my lifeline. Hearing Sarah laugh in the background, listening to Kelly describe normal activities like homework help and movie nights. For the first time in over a year, Sarah sounded like a regular 12-year-old. But our house had become a war zone. Dad was fighting the CPS removal with an army of expensive lawyers. His study became command central, filled with legal documents, character reference letters, and what he called his counter-narrative strategy. He'd hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on Amanda Walsh and Detective Torres, looking for any procedural errors that could invalidate their investigation. Mom had retreated into a fantasy world where none of this was really happening. She set the table for 4 people every night, made Sarah's favorite meals, and talked about her as if she was just away at summer camp. "Sarah loves these enchiladas," she'd say, spooning food onto an empty plate. "She'll be so excited when she comes home and sees I made them." Jake tried to be the voice of reason, but both parents had essentially stopped ignoring his existence. When he attempted to discuss what was really happening, Dad would walk away mid-sentence, and Mom would start humming loudly to drown him out. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when I found Dad going through my laptop. I'd come downstairs early to grab breakfast before school and found him in the kitchen with my computer open, scrolling through my browser history. My heart stopped when I saw he'd accessed my email accounts. "Find anything interesting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't look up from the screen. "Just checking to see what other lies you've been spreading about this family." "I haven't been spreading lies." "Haven't you?" He finally looked at me, and his expression was cold enough to freeze blood. "Because according to your search history, you've been researching how to testify in court cases, how to file restraining orders, and how to get emancipated from parents." My stomach dropped. I had been researching those things, but I thought I'd been careful about covering my tracks. "Smart girl," Dad continued, closing the laptop with a sharp snap, "but not quite smart enough. Did you really think I wouldn't monitor your internet activity? I've been tracking every website you visit, every email you send." He stood up and moved closer to me, and for the first time since this all started, I felt genuinely afraid of him again. Here's what's going to happen, Megan. You're going to call Amanda Walsh and tell her you exaggerated everything. You're going to explain that you misunderstood what you heard, that you were angry about normal teenage restrictions, and blew everything out of proportion. I'm not doing that. Yes, you are. Because if you don't, I'm going to make sure everyone at your school, everyone in this town, knows exactly what kind of person you really are. He pulled out his phone and showed me a document on the screen, a cytological evaluation report with my name on it. Dr. Richardson has been concerned about his daughter Megan's increasingly erratic behavior, he read aloud. Compulsive lying, attention-seeking fantasies, possible early signs of personality disorders similar to those seen in her maternal grandmother. I stared at the document, recognizing Dad's manipulative genius. Grandma Ruth had struggled with mental illness her entire life before dying in a psychiatric facility when I was 8. Dad was creating a narrative that would make me look unstable and unreliable. That's not real, I whispered. Isn't it? I've documented every instance of what could be called concerning behavior over the past 6 months. Your school counselor will receive this report explaining why you might fabricate serious allegations against your family. The police will see evidence that you have a history of attention-seeking lies. He leaned closer, and I could smell his coffee breath as he spoke. Your sister will come home, this family will go back to normal, and you will learn to keep your mouth shut, or I will destroy any credibility you think you have. That's when Jake walked into the kitchen. What's going on? He asked, immediately sensing the tension. Dad straightened up, sliding his phone back into his pocket. Just having a conversation with your sister about family loyalty. Jake looked between us, taking in my pale face and Dad's aggressive posture. Megan, you okay? Before I could answer, Dad spoke again. Jake, maybe you should know that your sister has been spreading these lies about our family to more people than just CPS. She's been researching how to turn family members against each other and how to break up homes. Is that what you call it? Jake's voice was dangerously quiet. Because I call it protecting Sarah from abuse. Dad's mask slipped again, just for a moment. You don't know what you're talking about, son. Don't I? Jake pulled out his own phone. Because I've been doing some research too. I know about your browser history, Dad. I know about the websites you visit when you think no one's watching. I know about the encrypted files on your computer. The color drained from Dad's face. You had no right. To protect my sisters? I had every right. Jake moved to stand between Dad and me. And here's what I found out. Child abusers almost always escalate when they're caught. They get more controlling, more manipulative, more dangerous. Dad was backing toward the kitchen door, but Jake wasn't finished. I also found out that threatening witnesses in a CPS investigation is a felony, so is tampering with evidence, which is what I'm guessing that fake psychological report counts as. You can't prove. Can't I? Jake held up his phone. Because I've been recording this whole conversation, just like Megan recorded you with Sarah. The silence that followed was absolute. Dad stared at Jake like he was seeing him for the first time, realizing that his golden child had turned completely against him. You've both lost your minds, Dad said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. No, I said, finding my voice again. We've finally seen clearly. Dad left for work without another word, but I knew this wasn't over. If anything, Jake's intervention had made things more dangerous. Dad now knew that both of his remaining children were actively working against him. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything again. I called Detective Torres directly. Detective, this is Megan Richardson. I need to report a threat and attempted witness intimidation. Are you safe right now, Megan? For now, but I think my dad is planning something. He tried to blackmail me into recanting my statement, and he's created fake evidence to discredit me. We need to meet. Can you get to the police station safely? My brother can drive me. Good. Come in immediately. And Megan, bring your brother with you. If he has evidence on his phone, we need to see it. As Jake and I drove toward the police station, I realized we'd crossed a line we could never uncross. We weren't just reporting abuse anymore, we were actively building a criminal case against our own father. But looking at the phone in my hand, seeing the contact for Aunt Kelly where Sarah was safe and happy, I knew we were doing the right thing. Our family was broken, but sometimes broken things needed to be completely dismantled before they could be rebuilt into something healthy. And for the first time in months, I believed that maybe, just maybe, we could all come out of this okay. The police station felt like stepping into a different universe, one where people believed us, where our evidence mattered, where Dad's manipulation tactics couldn't work. Detective Torres led Jake and me to a small conference room where Amanda Walsh was already waiting with a woman I didn't recognize. She introduced herself as District Attorney Jennifer Chen, the prosecutor who would be handling Dad's case. "Before we begin," DHN said, "I want you both to understand the gravity of what we're discussing. The evidence you've provided, combined with your sister's testimony, has given us grounds for multiple felony charges against your father." She spread several documents across the table: police reports, medical evaluations, forensic analysis of the recordings, child sexual abuse, witness intimidation, tampering with evidence, and what we're calling technological stalking based on the surveillance software we found on your devices, she continued. "If convicted on all charges, your father could face 15 to 25 years in prison." The number hit me like a physical blow. 25 years. Dad would be in his 70s when he got out, if he got out. "What about Mom?" Jake asked quietly. Detective Torres exchanged glances with DHN. "Your mother is in a complicated position. She was clearly aware of the abuse and failed to protect Sarah, which makes her complicit. However, we also have evidence suggesting she may have been psychologically manipulated and controlled by your father for years. She's going to testify against him," Amanda added, "in exchange for immunity from prosecution." I stared at them. Mom agreed to that? "She broke yesterday," Detective Torres explained. "Your father's legal team tried to pin everything on her, claiming she was the primary abuser and he was just trying to protect the family. When she realized he was going to sacrifice her to save himself, she decided to cooperate fully. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it took my breath away. Dad hadn't just abused Sarah. He'd manipulated Mom for years, then tried to destroy her the moment it became convenient. There's something else," DHN continued. "We executed a search warrant on your father's office and personal computers yesterday. What we found goes far beyond what happened in your home." She showed us a thick file folder. "Your father had been using his position at the financial firm to identify vulnerable families, single mothers, families in financial distress, people who couldn't fight back if accusations were made. We've found evidence of a pattern of abuse spanning to at least 8 years. Jake's face went white. "Other kids?" "We've identified 6 potential victims so far. 3 have already come forward after hearing about Sarah's case on the news." The room started spinning. This wasn't just about our family anymore. Dad was a predator who'd been systematically targeting children for years, using his professional reputation and financial manipulation to keep families silent. The recordings you made, Megan, were the key that unlocked everything. Without that evidence, we never would have gotten the warrants to search his computers and financial records. A knock on the conference room door interrupted us. A uniformed officer entered and whispered something to Detective Torres, who nodded grimly. "Your father's been arrested," he announced. "We picked him up at his office an hour ago. He's being charged formally tomorrow morning." The relief was overwhelming, but it was mixed with something else: fear. Dad had spent weeks planning his retaliation against us. What had he set in motion before his arrest? As if reading my thoughts, Amanda spoke up. "We're recommending that you and Jake stay with your aunt in Boston temporarily. Your father made bail arrangements, and he'll likely be released pending trial. Given his threats against you both, we think it's safer if you're not in Connecticut." "What about school?" I asked. "Your aunt is already working on temporary enrollment in Boston. Everything can be sorted out later." The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and hurried packing. Jake and I threw essentials into suitcases while Mom sat in the kitchen staring at nothing, completely catatonic. Mom? I tried talking to her, but she didn't respond. A victim's advocate named Maria had come to help Mom navigate the legal process and find temporary housing. Mom would be staying at a women's shelter until the trial was over, partly for her own protection, partly because the house was considered part of the crime scene evidence. Just before we left for Boston, I found Mom sitting on Sarah's bed, holding one of her stuffed animals. "I didn't know," she said suddenly, not looking at me. I told myself I didn't know. Mom. But I did know. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. I chose not to see it because seeing it would have meant admitting that I married a monster, that I brought children into a house with a monster. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were completely hollow. "I failed you. I failed Sarah. I failed as a mother in every way that matters." I wanted to comfort her, to say something that would ease her guilt, but I couldn't, because she was right. She had failed us. For years, she'd chosen Dad's version of reality over our safety. "Maybe now you can do better," I said finally. The drive to Boston took 3 hours. Jake and I barely spoke, both lost in our own thoughts. Everything we'd known about our lives, our family, our father, had been revealed as lies. We were essentially orphans now. Dad would go to prison, Mom was broken beyond repair, and we'd be living with an aunt we barely knew. But when we pulled into Aunt Kelly's driveway and saw Sarah waiting on the front porch, everything else faded away. She ran to the car before we'd even fully stopped, wrapping me in a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "I was so scared," she whispered. "When Kelly told me they arrested Dad, I was scared he'd find a way to hurt you before the police could stop him." "We're okay," I told her. "We're all okay now." That night, the 4 of us sat around Kelly's kitchen table eating takeout pizza and talking about everything that had happened. For the first time in over a year, Sarah seemed completely relaxed. She was making jokes, complaining about normal teenage things, acting like the kid she'd never gotten to be. "What happens next?" Jake asked Kelly. "Short term, you all stay here as long as you need to. School, therapy, whatever it takes to help you heal." Kelly looked at each of us. "Long term, that depends on what you want. I've already started the process to become your legal guardian if that's what you decide." "What about the trial?" I asked. "You'll have to testify, probably all of you. But the prosecutor thinks it'll be a strong case. Your father's lawyers are already talking about plea bargains." Sarah looked up from her pizza. "Good. I want everyone to know what he really is. I don't want any other kids to go through what I did." 3 months later, Dad pled guilty to all charges in exchange for 18 years in prison. He never showed any remorse, never apologized, never acknowledged what he'd done to Sarah or the other victims. Mom got 2 years probation and mandatory counseling. She moved to Arizona to live with her sister and start over where nobody knew her story. Sarah, Jake, and I stayed in Boston with Kelly, who officially adopted us 6 months later. Sarah started high school as a normal kid with normal problems. Jake transferred to a local college and became a social work major. I learned that surviving trauma didn't make you broken, it made you stronger than you ever thought possible. The recording that started everything was played in court during the sentencing hearing. As Dad's voice filled the courtroom, describing the unspeakable things he'd done to my sister, I watched him finally face the consequences of his actions. The truth had set us free, and sometimes that's the only justice that really matters. 2 weeks after our arrival in Boston, the media attention exploded in ways none of us had anticipated. What started as a local Connecticut story about child abuse suddenly became national news when investigative journalists discovered the full scope of Dad's crimes. "Richardson financial scandal exposes multi-year child abuse ring," read the headline in the Boston Globe. Below it was a photo of Dad being led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his carefully maintained image finally destroyed. The story revealed details that even we hadn't known. Dad hadn't just been targeting vulnerable families through his financial firm. He'd been coordinating with other predators, sharing information about potential victims, creating a network of abuse that stretched across 3 states.
The FBI had gotten involved, treating it as an organized crime investigation. 8 confirmed victims so far, Detective Torres told us during a video call from Connecticut. But we think there could be more. Your father kept detailed records of everything: financial vulnerabilities, family structures, which children might be most susceptible to manipulation. Sarah listened to this update with a strange calm that worried me. She'd been doing better in Boston, laughing more, sleeping through the night, but learning about the other victims seemed to affect her differently than the rest of us. How many of them were my age? She asked quietly. Sarah, you don't need to know those details. Yes, I do. Her voice was firm, more mature than any 13-year-old should sound. I need to know what he did to other kids. I need to understand how big this really was. Detective Torres looked uncomfortable, but answered honestly. 3 were around your age when the abuse started. 2 were younger, 1 was older. And their families? Did their parents know? In most cases, no. Your father was extremely sophisticated in his approach. He would identify families in financial crisis, offer to help with loans or investment advice, then gradually insert himself into their lives. By the time the abuse started, the families were financially dependent on him. I watched Sarah process this information, seeing her therapist Dr. Martinez's words about survivor's guilt playing out in real time. Sarah wasn't just dealing with her own trauma, she was grappling with the knowledge that other children had suffered because no one had stopped Dad sooner. It's not your fault, I told her later that night as we sat in Kelly's living room. You were a kid. You couldn't have known about the others. But what if I'd spoken up sooner? Sarah asked. What if I'd been braver earlier? Maybe those other kids would still have been abused, Jake interrupted from the doorway. Because the problem wasn't that you didn't speak up soon enough. The problem was that there was a predator targeting children, and adults who should have been protecting all of you failed to do their jobs.
Jake had been going to therapy too, working through his own guilt about not recognizing the signs. Dr. Martinez had explained that Dad's manipulation had been designed to keep family members isolated from each other, unable to see the full picture of what was happening. The weeks that followed brought a parade of lawyers, investigators, and journalists wanting to tell our story. DHN was building what she called an airtight case against Dad, but it required extensive testimony from all the victims and their families. Your recording remains the cornerstone of our evidence, she explained during one of our many meetings. It's the clearest documentation of abuse we have, and it's what gave us probable cause for all the subsequent searches and arrests. 3 other men had been arrested in connection with Dad's network, 2 other financial advisors from different firms, and a child psychologist who had been providing evaluations that helped Dad identify vulnerable children. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. But the legal process was also taking its toll on our family. Sarah had to undergo multiple interviews with different investigators, each time reliving details of her abuse. Jake and I were called as witnesses to describe the family dynamics and Dad's behavior patterns. Even Mom, despite her immunity deal, struggled with the constant depositions and psychological evaluations. I keep having to explain over and over again how I could have lived in the same house and not know what was happening, Mom told me during one of our supervised phone calls. But the truth is, I did know something was wrong. I just convinced myself it was normal family stress. Mom's therapy was revealing the extent to which Dad had been psychologically manipulating her for years. Her therapist described it as coercive control, a pattern of isolation, gaslighting, and emotional manipulation that had left Mom unable to trust her own perceptions. He would tell me that my concerns about Sarah were just maternal overprotectiveness, Mom continued. When I worried about her behavior changes, he'd say I was being dramatic. When I suggested family counseling, he'd say I was creating problems where none existed. Understanding Mom's situation didn't erase the years of feeling unprotected, but it helped explain how Dad had managed to abuse Sarah for so long without being caught. He hadn't just been targeting Sarah, he'd been systematically undermining every adult who might have intervened. The trial began 6 months after Dad's arrest. By then, 12 victims had come forward, their ages ranging from 8 to 16. The prosecution had organized the case around 4 primary victims, including Sarah, with the others providing supporting testimony about Dad's patterns of behavior.
I testified on the second day of the trial. Walking into that courtroom and seeing Dad sitting at the defendant's table was surreal. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing without his expensive suits and confident demeanor. His lawyers had dressed him in a simple gray suit, trying to make him look sympathetic, but there was no hiding the cold calculation in his eyes. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor began. "Megan Richardson." "And what is your relationship to the defendant?" "He's my father." The next 2 hours were the hardest of my life. I had to describe the family dynamics, the overheard conversations, the night I made the recording. When they played the audio in court, I watched the jury's faces transform from skeptical attention to horrified disgust. Dad's defense attorney tried to paint me as a troubled teenager with a history of lying and attention-seeking behavior. He brought up the fake psychological report Dad had created, trying to use it as evidence of my mental instability. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Richardson, that you fabricated this recording as part of a pattern of false accusations against your father?" "No, that's not true." "Haven't you been in therapy for behavioral problems?" "I've been in therapy to deal with the trauma of discovering that my father was abusing my sister." "But you have a history of making false statements to authority figures, don't you?" That's when DA Chen objected, producing evidence that Dad's documentation of my supposed behavioral problems was entirely fabricated. The defense attorney's strategy backfired spectacularly when the jury realized he was using forged evidence to attack a teenage victim. Sarah testified on the fourth day. Watching my little sister sit in that witness box, speaking calmly and clearly about the most horrific experiences of her life, was both heartbreaking and inspiring. She didn't break down, didn't let Dad's lawyers intimidate her, didn't waver in her testimony. "He told me that what happened to us was special," Sarah said, her voice steady. "He said it was how fathers showed love to daughters, but that other people wouldn't understand. He said if I ever told anyone, they would blame me and take me away from my family." Dad's lawyer tried to suggest that Sarah had misunderstood normal paternal affection, but Sarah was ready for him. "There's nothing normal about what he did to me," she replied, "and there's nothing normal about threatening a child to keep them quiet about it." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. During the sentencing hearing, each victim was allowed to give an impact statement. Sarah chose to speak last. "You took away my childhood," she said, looking directly at Dad for the first time since the trial began. "You made me afraid of my own home, my own family, my own body. You used my love for my sister as a weapon against me." Dad stared at her with no emotion, no remorse, no acknowledgement of the damage he'd caused. "But you didn't win," Sarah continued, "because I have something you'll never have. People who love me for who I am, not for what they can take from me. I have a sister who risked everything to protect me. I have a brother who chose truth over family loyalty. I have an aunt who opened her home to 3 broken kids and helped us heal." She paused, and for the first time, her voice wavered slightly. "I'm not broken anymore. I'm not afraid anymore. And every day I heal a little more is a day you lose a little more power over me." The judge sentenced Dad to 22 years in federal prison, followed by lifetime supervision and registration as a sex offender. With good behavior, he might be eligible for parole when he's 68 years old. The other defendants received sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. The child psychologist lost his license permanently and received 12 years. The financial advisors faced additional charges for the money laundering and fraud schemes they'd used to maintain control over victim families. Mom received her 2 years of probation as agreed, but she also voluntarily entered a long-term residential treatment program for trauma and codependency. She wanted to understand how she'd become so psychologically compromised that she'd failed to protect her own children. "I may never be able to be a real mother to you girls again," she told Sarah and me during a video call from her treatment facility. "The damage I allowed to happen, the ways I failed you, I'm not sure that can ever be forgiven. But I want you to know that I'm trying to become someone who would have protected you if I'd had the chance to do it over." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an acknowledgement. And sometimes, acknowledgement is the first step toward healing.
A year after the trial, Sarah started high school in Boston. She made honor roll her first semester and joined the debate team. She was seeing Dr. Martinez once a week, but was also functioning like a normal teenager, complaining about homework, arguing with Kelly about curfews, developing crushes on classmates. Jake finished his social work degree and got a job with a nonprofit organization that helps families navigate the Child Protective Services system. He wanted to be the advocate he wished we'd had earlier in the process. I started college with a major in criminal justice and a minor in psychology. The recording I'd made that night had changed everything for our family, but it had also taught me something about the power of evidence, the importance of documentation, and the way truth can triumph over even the most sophisticated manipulation. Kelly adopted all three of us officially, giving us a new last name and a fresh start. We were no longer the Richardson children, we were the Morrison kids, with a mother who believed us, protected us, and loved us without conditions or expectations. On the second anniversary of Dad's sentencing, Sarah and I participated in a documentary about child abuse and family trafficking. We wanted other kids to know that speaking up was possible, that adults who don't believe you aren't the only adults in the world, and that survival is not just possible, but can lead to thriving. The hardest part wasn't surviving the abuse, Sarah said during her interview. The hardest part was believing that I deserved to be saved. The documentary aired nationally and led to the formation of a foundation dedicated to helping children in similar situations. Sarah and I serve on the Youth Advisory Board, helping to create resources for kids who find themselves trapped in abusive family situations. 3 years later, I received a letter in prison mail. Dad's handwriting on the envelope made my hands shake, but I opened it anyway. "Megan," it read, "I want you to know that I forgive you for the lies you told about me. When I am released, I hope we can rebuild our relationship as father and daughter. Love, Dad." I showed the letter to Dr. Martinez during my monthly therapy session. "How does reading that make you feel?" she asked. "Angry," I said immediately, but also nothing, like it was written by a stranger. "That's healthy, Megan. You've successfully separated yourself from his manipulation. He's trying to reestablish control by framing himself as the forgiving parent and you as the wayward child who needs to apologize." I threw the letter away without responding. Dad would spend the next 19 years in prison, but I would spend those same years building a life he could never touch or influence again. That evening, I called Sarah to tell her about the letter. "Are you okay?" she asked immediately. "I'm fine, better than fine actually. Reading it felt like looking at something from a different lifetime." "Good," Sarah said, "because we have better things to think about than him. Did I tell you I got accepted to the summer journalism program at Northwestern?" Sarah wanted to be an investigative reporter, inspired by the journalists who had helped expose Dad's network. She was 15 now, confident and strong, with plans for her future that had nothing to do with the trauma of her past. We talked for an hour about her summer program, my upcoming internship with the DA's office, Jake's new girlfriend, and Kelly's plans to renovate the attic into a study space. Normal family conversations about normal family things. After we hung up, I thought about that scared 14-year-old girl who had crept down the hallway with her phone, determined to find out what was really happening to her sister. She couldn't have imagined that her 23-minute recording would save not just Sarah, but 11 other children. She couldn't have known that her act of courage would lead to a federal investigation and the dismantling of an entire abuse network. She just knew that her sister needed help, and she was the only one in position to provide it. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is bear witness to the truth, even when that truth is dangerous. Sometimes the only way to save someone you love is to risk everything to make sure their voice is heard. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. The notification sound from my phone made me smile instead of jumping. It was a text from Sarah. "Love you, big sister. Thanks for saving my life." I texted back, "Thanks for being worth saving." Because that's what families do for each other. The real families, the chosen families, the families built on love instead of control. We protect each other, believe each other, we save each other.
and we never, ever give up on each other. 5 years after Dad's conviction, the ripple effects of our story continued to spread in ways none of us had anticipated. The Richardson Foundation, named ironically after the family that had been destroyed to create it, had grown into a national organization with offices in 12 states. The foundation's primary mission was training law enforcement, teachers, and healthcare workers to recognize signs of organized family abuse, the sophisticated manipulation tactics that predators like Dad used to fly under the radar for years. Sarah, now a sophomore in college studying investigative journalism, had become one of the foundation's most effective speakers. The thing people don't understand about family trafficking, Sarah would tell audiences of social workers and police officers, is that it doesn't look like what you see in movies. There are no chains, no locked rooms, no obvious signs of captivity. The prison is psychological, built from threats against people you love and careful erosion of your ability to trust your own perceptions. I watched her speak at a conference in Chicago last month, amazed by the confident young woman she'd become. The girl who used to flinch at sudden movements now commanded rooms full of professionals, educating them about tactics that could help them save other children. But the foundation's work went beyond education. We'd also established a network of safe houses for children removed from abusive situations, staffed by people who understood the unique trauma of family-based abuse. Too many kids were being placed in standard foster care systems that weren't equipped to handle the complex psychological damage caused by parental predators. Jake, now 26 and a licensed clinical social worker, ran the foundation's family reunification program. His job was to help determine which family relationships could be rebuilt after abuse and which needed to be permanently severed. It was heartbreaking work, but Jake had found his calling in helping families navigate the impossible decisions that followed exposure of abuse. Some parents genuinely didn't know, he explained to me during our monthly sibling dinner at Kelly's house. They were victims of the same manipulation tactics as their children. Those families can sometimes heal together with proper therapy and support. And others? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Others are too damaged by complicity, denial, or their own psychological issues. In those cases, the kids are better off building new support systems. The distinction was something we'd all had to grapple with regarding Mom. Her participation in the residential treatment program had been genuine, and her therapy had revealed the extent to which Dad had systematically undermined her capacity for independent judgment. But understanding the reasons for her failures didn't erase the years Sarah had spent unprotected.
Mom had been out of residential treatment for 2 years now, living in a small apartment in Phoenix and working as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic. She'd completed her probation successfully and had been faithfully attending trauma therapy twice a week. Every few months, she would send carefully crafted letters asking if any of us were ready to have a relationship with her. Sarah had responded once, writing back to say she appreciated Mom's efforts at healing but wasn't ready for direct contact. Jake exchanged occasional emails with her, mostly updates about his work and general life events. I hadn't responded to any of her letters, unsure if I ever would be ready to forgive her silence during the years Sarah needed protection most. Forgiveness isn't about her, Dr. Martinez had told me during one of our sessions. It's about whether holding on to anger serves your healing or hinders it. There's no timeline for that decision, and there's no wrong choice. The question of forgiveness had become more complicated after we learned about Mom's own childhood. During her therapy, memories had surfaced of abuse she'd experienced from her father, Dad's mentor in financial planning, the man who had introduced them when Mom was just 19. The pattern of predatory behavior stretched back further than any of us had realized, with each generation creating the vulnerabilities that the next generation of predators could exploit. It doesn't excuse what she did, Kelly told us during one of our family discussions about whether to maintain contact with Mom, but it explains how she became someone who could normalize abnormal behavior. Trauma doesn't excuse harmful choices, but it can help us understand how those choices became possible. Kelly had her own complicated relationship with forgiveness. As Mom's younger sister, she'd spent years wondering if she should have done more to recognize the signs of trouble in our family. She'd noticed that Mom seemed increasingly isolated and anxious during family gatherings, but she'd attributed it to normal marital stress rather than systematic psychological abuse. I keep thinking about all the phone calls where Linda would start to tell me something was wrong, then change the subject, Kelly confided in me one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. I should have pushed harder, asked more direct questions. Dad was manipulating her to keep her isolated from you, I reminded her. He probably coached her on what to say during those calls to make everything sound normal. Kelly nodded, but I could see the guilt still weighed on her. The Foundation's work had taught all of us that predators like Dad were skilled at manipulating entire family systems, turning potential allies against each other, and creating environments where abuse could flourish undetected. The most disturbing revelation from Dad's trial had been the discovery of his manual, a detailed document found on his encrypted computer that outlined strategies for identifying, grooming, and controlling victims. It reads like a how-to guide for family trafficking, complete with psychological techniques for breaking down children's resistance and methods for keeping family members from comparing notes about suspicious behavior. Law enforcement had found copies of similar manuals on the computers of the other men in Dad's network. They weren't just individual predators who happened to know each other, they were part of an organized system for exploiting children, sharing strategies, and even trading access to victims. Your father's arrest led to the identification of similar networks in 6 other states, FBI agent Rebecca Kim had told us during a briefing last year. The manual he created has become a training tool for law enforcement, helping us recognize the signs of organized family abuse before it becomes entrenched. The idea that Dad's methods were being used to train people to stop other predators felt like a form of cosmic justice. His carefully documented tactics for manipulation and control had become the very evidence that would prevent other children from experiencing what Sarah had endured. But the investigation had also revealed how many children had suffered before we found the courage to speak up. The 12 confirmed victims were just the ones law enforcement could prove in court. Dad's financial records suggested he'd had inappropriate relationships with families spanning nearly 15 years, potentially involving dozens more children whose families had been too intimidated or financially dependent to report what happened. The hardest part of my job, Agent Kim had told us, is knowing that for every case we solve, there are probably 3 more we never hear about. Predators like your father are experts at choosing victims who can't or won't report them. This knowledge had driven Sarah's decision to focus her journalism studies on investigative reporting about child trafficking and abuse. She wanted to use media attention to force law enforcement and social services to take these cases more seriously, to look beyond individual bad actors, and recognize the systematic nature of organized abuse. Individual prosecutions aren't enough, Sarah had written in her college newspaper editorial that went viral last semester. We need to understand that people like my father don't operate in isolation. They create networks, share resources, and deliberately target the most vulnerable families in their communities. Until we start investigating family abuse as organized crime, we'll keep missing the bigger picture. The editorial had caught the attention of several major news outlets, leading to interview requests and speaking opportunities. Sarah was building a platform that would allow her voice to reach other young survivors who might be struggling to find the courage to speak up about their own situations. Meanwhile, my own career path had taken an unexpected turn. After completing my criminal justice degree, I'd been accepted to law school with a full scholarship, funded by a victims' rights organization. My plan was to specialize in prosecuting crimes against children, using the legal system to seek justice for families like ours. You have a unique perspective, my constitutional law professor had told me after class one day. You understand the victim's experience in a way that most prosecutors never will. That empathy, combined with rigorous legal training, could make you incredibly effective in this field. The law school coursework was challenging, but it felt like preparation for the work I was meant to do. Every case study about family court procedures, every discussion about evidence standards in abuse cases, every analysis of victim testimony reliability felt personally meaningful in a way that academic work had never felt before. During my internship with the DA's office last summer, I'd been assigned to assist with a case involving a financial advisor who'd been accused of abusing clients' children. The similarities to Dab's case were striking. The use of financial leverage to control families, the careful grooming of victims, the manipulation of parents into complicity or silence. This case wouldn't have been prosecuted 5 years ago, the lead prosecutor told me. Before your family's case, law enforcement didn't understand how financial manipulation could be used as a tool for child abuse. Now we know what to look for.
The question of that case proceeding through the courts, seeing another predator face consequences for crimes that might have gone unnoticed without the precedent Dad's case had established, felt like validation of everything we'd been through. The 23-minute recording I'd made in the hallway outside Sarah's room had created ripples that were still spreading, still protecting children whose names we'd never know. But success in law school and the Foundation's growing impact couldn't erase the ongoing challenges of healing from family trauma. All three of us continued therapy, working through different aspects of our experiences as we reached new stages of development. Jake struggled with trust in romantic relationships, finding it difficult to believe that partners wouldn't eventually reveal hidden manipulative agendas. Sarah dealt with hypervigilance and control issues, needing to know everyone's location and plans at all times to feel safe. I found myself obsessively documenting everything, conversations, meetings, even casual interactions, as if I still needed to gather evidence to prove my reality was real. Trauma responses that helped you survive dangerous situations can become obstacles when you're trying to build healthy relationships, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our family therapy sessions with Kelly. Recovery means learning when those responses are still useful and when they're holding you back from the connection you deserve. The work was ongoing, probably lifelong, but we were doing it together as a family that chose each other daily. Kelly had created a home where we could be honest about our struggles without fear of judgment or punishment. We could have bad days, make mistakes, work through difficulties without anyone threatening to abandon or hurt us. Real families aren't perfect, Kelly often reminded us, but they are safe. You can be your worst self here and still be loved. You can fail and still belong. You can grow and change without losing your place at the table. That security had given all three of us the foundation we needed to rebuild our sense of self-worth and possibility. We were no longer the Richardson children, defined by trauma and survival. We were the Morrison kids, building futures that honored our past without being limited by it. And every year on the anniversary of Dad's sentencing, we celebrated not his punishment, but our freedom. We were free to choose our own relationships, free to trust our own perceptions, free to build lives based on love rather than fear. That freedom, we learned, was worth fighting for, and it was definitely worth saving. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.